Hello and welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be taking a look at a brand new lesson on dimensioning of orthographic drawings. So I'm already present in our course hub. I'm going to be clicking into content and going back to the module called AutoCAD PDF files for iPad. And here is the note here. Now, we haven't taken a look at this previously. This is the first time we're going to be looking at this note, although it's been in the hub here all along. So I'm going to be clicking on this. This is going to reveal a note that explains the basic dimensioning rules for orthographic drawings. Now, this is something that we haven't needed to worry about for the first three single view drawings, which were the shape, W, and arrow. You were just doing a straight copy of those dimensions as you saw them on the PDF sheets. So I'm going to be discussing these rules for a few moments now, and then I'm going to be actually dimensioning the control bearing and doing it in a way that satisfies the rules of this list. So number one is something that we're already familiar with. It says place the first set of dimensions 12 millimeters away and second set or more 10 millimeters away from the previous set. So that's why that one's number one. We've already experienced this in our first set of drawings that we've already completed. Everyone should be familiar with that and how to actually set that spacing appropriately. Number two says place dimensions off, which in brackets means outside the views. So for dimensioning an orthographic drawing, we don't want any of the dimensions to actually sit on top of any of the views. We want all of the dimensions to be pulled out of the views that 12 millimeters away or 10 millimeters away, depending on what type of dimension it is we're placing on the drawing itself. Number three says dimension each feature only once on one of the views and dimension only two object lines. So that mentions two things. And the first one is we don't want to duplicate a dimension throughout our drawing multiple times just because we can put it there. We only want to show the dimension once. Otherwise, if we keep repeating a dimension in multiple views, it crowds the drawing and gives us too much unnecessary information. We want as little information as possible on the drawing to be able to accurately manufacture the part, whatever it is you're trying to build. And the second rule on that value is do not dimension, it says dimension only to object lines. So any hidden details you find on your drawing, do not place any dimensions to those lines, right? So that's a very black and white rule. Basically, you think of it like a true and false, right? Only one of them can be correct. It's the same with that rule. Never ever place a dimension on a hidden line. And you will not see me do it either in today's lesson. Number four says place dimensions in the drawing view where they will be the easiest to understand. And in brackets it says in profile. So we try to place dimensions on views where they're going to be the easiest to understand. So basically, where we see a profile is easier to understand versus seeing just features that are in flat 2D perspective. And I will speak to these again as I'm completing the lesson later on. Number five says exclude one dimension in a chain of dimensions and make sure dimension arrows, which are leaders, are chained together. So we don't want arrowheads not lining up. They shouldn't be misaligned. All the arrowhead leaders should be chained together perfectly. And this is something that you were shown previously in dimensioning lessons for the single view drawings. And I also want to mention that in a chain, we always exclude one dimension. And there's a reason for that. And that's going to speak to number 7 when we get there. Number 6 says dimension features that are obviously identical only once. So meaning if you have a bunch of holes on your drawing that are all the same size, instead of dimensioning all the holes or placing a dimension for every hole you have, you would place the dimension on one of the holes and you would just add a TYP on the end, which stands for typical. And lastly, 7 says it should say N, not end, include an overall dimension on each of the drawing views. So this is something that's probably not going to be given on our orthographic drawing problem sheet. We'll have to add the overall dimensions. It's a lot easier to look at an overall dimension and find out what you're working with versus having to add up a bunch of dimensions together to find out how long your part is actually going to be. So this is a little hard to understand probably for a lot of you because I'm just basically giving verbal examples here that you cannot see, but I'm going to now begin with the control bearing, start the dimensioning process, and hopefully this will make a lot more sense by the end of the lesson. So I'm going to be clicking into AutoCAD. So this is the control bearing, which is the drawing I completed a while ago now. And I've got the basic dimensioning rules list. It is open next to my computer on my iPad. I also have open the basic orthographic drawing problem handout. And I'll open it up on here again, which is right here. So this is the one we're working on today. You can see that this already breaks some of the rules I've talked about. This 20 dimension is sitting on the part. It should be sitting outside the part like we discussed. And some of the dimensions are not in the correct profile, which I'm going to be making some adjustments on. You can also see this drawing has no overall dimension. It has 3 dimensions chained up. And again, this is poor practice for someone who's going to be building the control bearing. They're going to want to know exactly overall length and overall thickness. They have the overall thickness and the overall width, but they don't have the overall length. They have to add these numbers up. That's annoying to do. So I'll be making these adjustments. Some of these dimensions I'm going to be keeping in the same orientation as you see because some of them do make sense. A lot of it makes sense, some of it doesn't. So we're going to make some adjustments. All right, so to begin, I'm going to start by placing the dimensions that were seen on this view, on the top view here. Now these dimensions could go on the left side or the right side. It doesn't really matter as long as there's room for them. So I'll keep them on that side. So I'm going to start making sure ortho is turned on, which it wasn't. I was in polar mode. And I'm going to select linear dimension from annotation and left click these 2 endpoints. And that's going to pull an 11 dimension off the part. Remember the process for creating dimensions, endpoint, snap it to the part. Using a grip, select it at its value and type in 12 because that dimension needs to be 12 millimeters away. We can right click, repeat dim linear, which will put me back into the dimensioning command. Select this endpoint and this endpoint and chain up the 28 dimension to the 11. Right? They have to chain up. So I have these 2 dimensions sitting in the exact same position on the same orientation on the top view that we see on this image. We're also going to add the 50. And we're also going to leave out the 11 as they've done because we're going to leave 1 dimension out on a chain. That's in our list. That is number 5. Exclude 1 dimension in a chain of dimensions. All right, so some of this is correct already. Now let's add the 50. Right click, repeat dim linear, endpoint to endpoint. Snap this arrow to the 11, and then select the dimension leader down here. Pull that the value out. This is going to be 10 millimeters away because it's the second dimension coming off the first stack. And it looks good to me. All right, so what do we have to do next on this top view? We don't know the depth of this slot. It's listed here as 10. But again, I don't like the position of this dimension. This dimension should be placed off the part, as we've discussed, in a better position. So we have to place that 10 up on the top view, because it's illegal for us to place the dimension on the front view as they show, because they would be dimensioning to a hidden detail line. And we talked about this earlier, we cannot dimension to hidden lines. So we're going to have to place it up on the top view. So I'm going to select linear dimension again, select this endpoint and this endpoint, snap it to the edge of the part, and grab it at the value and come up 12. Now, why did I place the dimension here? Why didn't I place it over here, or coming off between the two views? Well, here's my reasoning. I don't want to unnecessarily crowd views if I don't have to. I'm going to try to avoid placing dimensions between views if I don't need to, because it's going to create crowding. I'm going to have to place some dimensions between views later, and I don't want it to be, I don't want them to be too close together, because we only have 40 millimeters between views. And it makes sense to keep the 10 with these dimensions versus sitting by itself over here. I might as well try to keep, draw the eye to one location on the drawing. Right? It makes sense to kind of keep this with all these three. I could have placed it over here, but experience tells me it makes sense to keep things together. All right, moving on. The 20 dimension here has to be shown. It can only be shown on the front view, where we can get actual perspective of its depth. And I'm going to be placing that dimension. I could place it between the views. I know I can't keep it sitting on the part, but I'm going to place it off to the left. I'm going to, again, not crowd between two views if I don't need to. So I'm going to pick linear dimension. I'm going to select this. Actually, not that endpoint. I'm going to redo that. This endpoint and this endpoint. Snap the dimension to the part, and now pull it off 12 millimeters, like that. Again, I could have placed the dimension here, but it's more correct to place it here and not crowd between two views if I don't need to. Remember, this is not perfect. We're making proper improvements to this. We can't just strictly copy what we see. Okay, next up, we have the overall thickness of the control bearing. It's 41.5. I don't have room to place that dimension here because it's going to cut off the border. I could put it between views, but I don't want to do that if I don't need to, so I can place it on the right side of the right side view. Repeat dim linear, endpoint to endpoint, snap to the edge of the part, and then pull out 12. And I've got that dimension done. So I'm keeping very true to my basic dimensioning rule list, right? I'm following all the rules as required. Next up, we've got to show the 44 and the 40 The rules do say leave one out of a chain, so I'm going to be dropping one of these dimensions out of the chain, which is going to probably be this 44. So I'm just going to do these two. So I'm going to place these dimensions here. And I'll explain why. Let's come up 12. And let's repeat the next dimension from here to here, this endpoint. Chain up to the 44. And we're not going to do the 44. We're going to leave it like that. Now, why would I do this? Why would I place these two dimensions on the front view when I could have placed them up here where they'd be out of the way and not crowding between two views? Well, we have to go back to our basic dimensioning list, and it tells us in point number, I'm trying to find it here, which number it is. Actually, I don't have it. Do I? Oh, no, I do. Number 4, place dimensions in the drawing view where they will be the easiest to understand in profile. Okay, that's what I was looking for. This here is a profile. Right, it actually shows us the slot here. When we look at this in the top view, yeah, we see the slot, but again, all the perspective is flat to us. It's basically just flat 2D perspective. It's better to place the dimension where we can see the profile and where it's easier to understand. If that means making a sacrifice and putting dimensions between views, that's what we have to do. So I could copy these dimensions. This is the copy tool. Go from this endpoint to this endpoint, and I've just copied them in the same position on the top view. Now this is incorrect because we're dimensioning a feature more than once. We can only dimension one of the features on one of the views and be done. We can't just add dimensions everywhere on the drawing for the heck of it, because it's going to become too crowded and too confusing. So when I look at these two dimensions, I think, to me, it's easier to understand in the front view versus the top view. Even though they have a dimension like this on the control bearing PDF document, this is the preferred way to do it. So I'm going to drop these dimensions and erase them because I don't need them. What do I have left to do? I have all the dimensions as seen here on the drawing. Of course, I had to drop the 44. I'm lacking an overall dimension for my length. So I need to be able to have an overall dimension for my length, and I have to be able to fit it on here. It can't be on the right side view. It's got to be placed to the front view or the top view. So let's see if I'll get one to fit. I'll go linear dimension, endpoint to endpoint, snap to this endpoint, and then we have to bring this one up 10. And it fits. It's a little crowded to the top of the border, but it does fit. What we could do is run the dimension below and see how that one looks. So we'll right click, repeat dim linear, endpoint to endpoint, snap it to the bottom, and we'll come out 12. So both of these are correct. We just can't have two of them, as I've just discussed. And we could have placed the 128 dimension 10 millimeters above the 44 and the 40, but again, there's no good excuse to run that dimension because there's no advantage to having it between the two views like we see these two. If there's no advantage and it unnecessarily crowds, we cannot do it. So what I'm going to do, I think, is leave the dimension on the front view today, and I'm going to drop the one on the top view, just because there's too much of a gap here, which I don't like. So I'm going to erase that one, and that's all the dimensions complete. So what I have to do now is select these dimensions, as we've done before, and place them on the dimensions layer, which will turn them red and lighten their contrast if we were going to print the drawing out. So this satisfies the list. Right, when I look at this, step number 1 says I placed all the dimensions 12 millimeters away on the first set. The second set are all 10 millimeters away. I can check mark that. I've done that. Number 2 says place dimensions off outside the views. Yes, all the dimensions are sitting outside the views, off the views. None of them are sitting right on top anywhere. Number 3 says dimension each feature only once on one of the views and dimension only to object lines. And that's what I've done here. I don't have the 44 and the 40 listed up here. I don't have it listed underneath. I don't have it listed anywhere else. You see one dimension once on one of the views, and that's all we need. This drawing is very easy to understand with a limited number of dimensions, but we have enough dimensions to be able to manufacture it. And we've only dimensioned the object lines, right? If I was to run a dimension like this for the 20, this is incorrect. We can never do this ever. This dimension is in the proper position, and its extension line runs from the top surface of the control bearing and it travels to the bottom of the slot. The extension line is perfect like this. Some people might want to drag the extension line to here, but that's incorrect. This should be touching the feature that it's connected to, right? We're trying to tell a story that this is 20 millimeters deep from the top to the bottom. Let's get rid of this dimension because we don't need it. Dimensions are placed in the drawing where they are the easiest to understand in profile. Yes, the 20 is like that, the 44 and the 40 are like that, and the 11, 28 dimension are doing the same thing, as the same as the depth of the slot, which is 10. Dimension features that are obviously identical only once. You know, this side is identical. Obviously, we're not going to be duplicating these dimensions on this side because it's going to cause over-dimensioning. It's quite obvious that this is the same as this, so we're going to just leave this blank and not add any dimensions. And lastly, we included an overall dimension on one of the drawing views. We have it right here. If I was to add the 44 dimension, like we see on the control bearing sheet, which is incorrect, that's all fine, right? But it's, again, this is over dimensioning. It's more advantageous to leave one out of the chain and have the overall, because if we leave it like this, it's too much information. Yes, if I add 44, 40, and 44, I'm going to get 128. It's the same information as this, but this is better, the overall, because I don't have to actually add anything up. I can just look at the dimension, see its dimension from here to here, and I can just know how large it has to be. And I know I have to have an overall dimension. So I'm going to, again, drop this one, and now it's back to being correct. And the last thing I have to do before I sign off, this is a little review on title block information, filling in the title block, which is something we haven't done yet, or possibly you have. So caps lock on. Control bearing. When I type control bearing, it doesn't want to fit. So all I have to do is just drag this arrow out, and it'll fit on one line, and I'll click away. Now it's cutting into the next box. So if I select it with a grip, and I go up to modify and select move and left click that, I can move this to the left. I can just eyeball this to be correct, just kind of in the center like that. Next is my name. First initial, period, space, my last name. Pan over, let's do the date. Today's date is the 3rd month, and it's the 22nd day in the 21st year. Scale, 1:1. Ratio, and drawing number is 101-04, because this was our 4th drawing that we had completed. Take a look at your scale for 1:1. If it's centered, leave it. If it's not centered, mine doesn't look like it is, I'll just move mine. I'll hit the move and just move it over a bit with Ortho1, and that looks a lot better. Okay, so that completes the control bearing drawing now fully. It is completely finished. There's nothing left to do to this, and at this point it's ready to be submitted for a check mark. I'm just going to hit save, and that's it. So dimensioning a orthographic drawing, it takes a little bit of critical thinking. It's not like dimensioning the single views where we're just copying them. If we understand the rules, and there's only about 7 of them, and we can apply the rules, and we think about applying the rules, we should be able to dimension a drawing with great success. So I wish you luck, and I want you to try this with your control bearing, and if you need a hand, let me know, and I will be happy to give you a hand. Take care for now, and have a great day.